Hotep, you guys. Welcome back to the Chosen Few channel. I'm your host, Matthew Daniels, the writer, author, scribe, and bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm, world. I'm the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. And as always, may your name live on forever, and may your memory never die. And remember, if you want to support The Real Bookworm, you could purchase one of the 4 books that I've written by clicking the link in the description. I appreciate the support. Today, we're going to be talking about Bloodshed for Freedom, Black Civil War Heroes. That's Bloodshed for Freedom, Black Civil War Heroes. A lot of times when the story of how slavery ended gets told, people tell the story as if the blacks, the Negroes, the African Americans, the enslaved Africans were simply waiting around until they were saved by Abraham Lincoln and the Union. And that's not the full story. The enslaved Africans fought the entire time, even during the Civil War, for their freedom. They fought in revolts during slavery. They fought in wars on the African continent. They escaped on the Underground Railroad, and they fought and helped in the actual Civil War. So in this video, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a couple of instances of blacks fighting in the Civil War to show you that they did not stand on the sidelines and just wait to be saved. Now, the first thing I want to show you guys is we're going to the book Black Reconstruction in America by W.E.B. Du Bois. And what I want to show you first is that the general consensus is that the blacks would not fight for themselves. But, spoiler alert, that idea gets proven wrong. Even people like President Abraham Lincoln did not think that the enslaved Africans was willing to shed blood for their freedom. So let's go into this book and let's see what Abraham Lincoln had to say. It says, in September 1862, Lincoln said to representatives of the Chicago Protestants, "I admit that slavery is at the root of the rebellion, or at least its sine qua non. I will also concede that emancipation would help us in Europe. I grant further that it would help somewhat at the North, though not so much. I fear, as you and those you represent imagine. And then, unquestionably, it would weaken the rebels by drawing off their laborers, which is of great importance. But I am not so sure we could do much with the blacks. If we were to arm them, I fear that in a few weeks the arms would be in the hands of the rebels." So we see that President Abraham Lincoln believed that freeing the slaves would hurt the Confederacy by taking their labor force, but it would not hurt them in terms of physical combat, because he did not believe that the blacks would fight. He went on to say that what good would a proclamation of emancipation from me do, especially as we are now situated? I do not want to issue a document that the whole world will see must necessarily be inoperative, like the Pope's bull against the common. So right there, now we know Abraham Lincoln eventually did sign the Emancipation Proclamation, but we see here he's questioning the relevance of it. And he questions the relevance of the Emancipation Proclamation so much that he references the Pope's bull against the common. But what is he talking about? He's talking about this guy, Pope Calixtus III. Now, he was born in Spain, December 31st, 1378, and he died in Rome, Italy, August the 6th, 1458. And there is a myth about this guy saying that he excommunicated Halley's Comet, right? That back in the day, he wrote a papal bull where he excommunicated Halley's Comet. But the claim is that that is all just a hoax, and I mean a myth. And that myth is tied to a man named Tina, who was writing about the events in 1456, and he said, a hairy and fiery comet, having then made its appearance for several days, as the mathematicians declared that there would follow a grievous pestilence, dearth, and some great calamity, Callistus, to avert the wrath of God, ordered supplications that if evils were impending for the human race, he would turn all upon the Turks, the enemies of the Christian name. He likewise ordered to move God by continual entreaty that notice should be given by the bells to all the faithful at midday to aid by their prayers those engaged in battle with the Turk. Now, no reference to excommunication is made in that, but the myth was built off of that. So Abraham Lincoln is saying that the Emancipation Proclamation will be just as valid as this mythological story of the Pope excommunicating Halley's Comet, a comet that's off in space that really has no relevance. But he eventually signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but that shows you how he felt about it. So let's go a little further, family. I'm going to show you that other people felt like Abraham Lincoln as well with respect to the idea that the enslaved Africans would not fight for their freedom. It says, the South was for a long time convinced that the Negro could not and would not fight. The idea of their doing any serious fighting against white men is simply ridiculous, said an editorial in the Savannah Republican, March 25th, 1863. Of the actual fighting of Negroes, a Union General, Morgan, afterward interested in Negro education, says, history has not yet done justice to the share borne by colored soldiers in the war for the Union. Their conduct during that eventful period has been a silent but most potent factor in influencing public sentiment, shaping legislation, and fixing the status of colored people in America. If the records of their achievements could be put into shape, that they could be accessible to the thousands of colored youths in the South, they would kindle in their young minds an enthusiastic devotion to manhood and liberty. Black men were repeatedly and deliberately used as shock troops when there was little or no hope of success. In February 1863, Colonel Thomas Wentworth Higgins led black troops into Florida and declared it would have been madness to attempt what the bravest white troops was successfully accomplished with black ones. So what they're basically saying is, although individuals were questioning if the Negro would fight and if he could fight well, the question was solved when the Civil War jumped off. They fought, and not only did they fight, they fought harder than their white counterparts in a lot of the battles. In April, there were 3 white companies from Maine and 7 Negro companies on Ship Island, the key to New Orleans. The black troops with black officers were attacked by Confederates who outnumbered them 5-1. Listen to this. The Negroes retreated so as to give the federal gunboat Jackson a chance to shell their pursuers. But the white crew disliked the Negro soldiers and opened fire directly upon the black troops while they were fighting the Confederates. So here you have blacks fighting in the Union Army, ambushed by Confederates, fighting the Confederates, and the Union soldiers that's on their side began firing on the blacks as well. They're pinned in between so-called friendly fire and Confederate fire. Major Dumas, the Negro officer in command, listen to the language, rescued the black men, repulsed the Confederates, and brought the men out safely. The commander called attention to these colored officers. They were constantly in the thickest of the fight, and by their unflinching bravery and admirable handling of their commands, contributed to the success of the attack and reflected great honor upon the flag. Some of us have to understand everything that's on this country is ours as well. We fought, we died, we bled, we built. And nobody can make the claim that when the time for freedom came, The enslaved Africans stood on the sidelines and waited for someone else to save them. As soon as they got the weapons into their hands, they put in work. In June came the Battle of Milken's Bend. Grant, in order to capture Vicksburg, had drawn nearly all his troops from Milken's Bend except 3 Negro regiments and a small force of white cavalry. So he's about to go into the details of one of the most bloodiest battles of the Civil War. Before the colonel was ready, the men were in line, ready for action. As before stated, the rebels drove our force toward the gunboats, taking colored men prisoners and murdering them. So colored men are being taken prisoner and being murdered, and watch what the colored troops do. This so enraged them, the colored troops, that they rallied and charged the enemy more heroically and desperately than has been recorded during the war. It was a genuine bayonet charge, a hand-to-hand fight that has never occurred to any extent during this prolonged conflict. Upon both sides, men were killed with the butts of muskets. So what he's describing is one of the bloodiest battles that's popping off in the middle of the Civil War. The colored troops were seeing their loved ones being treated heinously and viciously, what they were forced to watch and accept during slavery. But now they have weapons. Now it's a war. Now they can stand like men, and they rushed them with a hand-to-hand combat bayonet charge and put in that work. White and black men were lying side by side, pierced with bayonets, and in some instances transfixed to the earth. In one instance, 2 men, one white and the other black, were found dead side by side, each having the other's bayonet through his body. So this is a white man and a black man. They're both dead. They both stabbed each other. Each of them died at the hands of their enemy, and each of them killed their enemy with their last breath. This is hardcore fighting, family. If facts prove to be what they are now represented, this engagement of Sunday morning will be recorded as the most desperate of this war. Broken limbs, broken heads, the mangling of bodies all prove that it was a contest between enraged men. On the one side, from hatred to a race, and on the other, desire for self-preservation, revenge for past grievances, and the inhumane murder of their comrades. We're talking about bloodshed for freedom, black Civil War heroes. Check this out, family. When General Thomas rode over the battlefield and saw the bodies of colored men side by side with the foremost on the very works of the enemy, he turned to his staff saying, "Gentlemen, the question is settled. Negroes will fight." So for Abraham Lincoln, who eventually got assassinated, and for everyone else who was wondering, the question was settled on the battlefield. How extraordinary, and what a tribute to ignorance and religious hypocrisy is the fact that in the minds of most people, even those of liberals, only murder makes men. The slave pleaded. He was humble. He protected the women of the South, and the world ignored him. The slave killed white men, and behold, he was a man. The New York Times said conservatively in 1863, and then I'm going to end it, Negro soldiers have now been in battle at Port Hudson and at Milken's Bend in Louisiana, at Helena in Arkansas, at Morris Island in South Carolina, and at or near Fort Gibson in the Indian Territory. In 2 of these instances, they assaulted fortified positions and led the assault. In 2, they fought on the defensive, and in 1, they attacked rebel infantry. In all of them, they acted in conjunction with white troops and under command of white officers. In some instances, they acted with distinguished bravery, and in all, they acted as well as could be expected of raw truths. So never let anybody tell you that the enslaved Africans sat around and waited to be saved. No, they fought the entire time during slavery, and when the Civil War kicked off, they were still fighting, and even after the Civil War, they were still fighting. One of my ancestors, Thomas Daniel Sr., born in 1848, was one of the first Buffalo Soldiers, family. He was one of the first Buffalo Soldiers, and he fought in some of the Indian Wars. So I actually have bloodline ties to the fighting African Americans. So I hope you guys like that information. Bloodshed for Freedom, Black Civil War Heroes. And remember, in the description is a link to my books. If you want to support the channel, if you want to support literacy, if you just want to get a good read, click the link, go read the synopsis. I have 4 books, and purchase a book. I appreciate your support. This is your brother Matthew Daniels, aka I'm Pooh, aka The Chosen Few, aka The Real Bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm world, I'm the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. And as always, may your name live on forever, and may your memory, family, never die.